Well, good morning. Just for the record, the sermon title this morning is When You've Got Weeds, plural. So if you're expecting something different, I can help you. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. So I do have a problem. And I really need help. We have an infestation at our house of nutgrass. You guys know what that is? It's a weed. It's also known as nutsedge or watergrass. It is evil. It comes from the devil. You can't really easily kill it. It comes up in the lawn. It comes up in flower beds. It comes up in my nightmares. It's all over the place. And to make matters worse, the nursery where I buy a lot of our products for our fertilizers, herbicides, and so forth, says they can't sell this particular herbicide that kills nutgrass any longer because of environmental reasons. So I'm considering either writing a letter to my congressman to see about changing that, or calling my concrete contractor and just paving over everything. So when Jesus tells this parable about wheat and weeds, he has my attention. But I don't particularly like his solution. He says, let the weeds alone. Don't worry about them. He said there come a time at the harvest when someone will take care of the weeds. But you don't have to worry about that. Obviously, the harvest that Jesus is alluding to is not when I mow my lawn. It's the end times. The time when earth no longer is and eternity begins. The final judgment, we oftentimes talk about it as. And the weeds that Jesus is speaking about, it's not nutgrass. It's something a little more serious. I don't know too many people who like talking about the end times. It causes people to feel like, remember when you were in school and there was an end of the semester final test and you didn't study for it? It kind of feels like that times a million. Because nobody that I know at any rate looks forward to this decisive moment when all eternity will be decided because of what you've done and who you've been. Well, actually, there may be one group of people who kind of look forward to this time. Preachers. If you were to get onto the web and punch in sermons on the final judgment or sermons on the parable of the wheat and the weeds, you would not like what you find. For whatever reason, preachers love to preach on this topic that there are good people and there are bad people. And the good people will go to heaven someday, and the bad people won't go to heaven. And the job of us Christians, evidently, is to make sure that we're among the good people. And not to hang around the bad people, because we don't want to go where they go. I'm sure you've heard a rendition of that story, or read about it, or even have talked with somebody who has that perspective. Chances are that person you talked to was a preacher or somebody influenced by a preacher. But let's be honest just for a moment to say there are bad people in the world, aren't there?
Oh, yeah.
There are not just bad people, but evil people. People that do things to other people that's horrible. And we don't have to list names like Adolf Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer or Paul. I mean, there are people who sell drugs to little kids. There are people who kidnap and sell little kids. There are people who buy and sell women for sexual gratification. There are people who sexually or emotionally abuse kids. There are people who indiscriminately walk into large rooms and open fire with guns. There are people who strap explosives to their bodies and walk into busy marketplaces. I mean, we hear about these things and we see evidence of them on the news every week. Things that people do that are horrible to other people. And so we began to think, yeah, maybe it's not such a bad thing for evil people to pay for their badness. Send them to some furnace someplace, or whatever eternal fires might mean. We might be in agreement, at least those of us who haven't committed such atrocities, that Judgment Day isn't such a bad thing after all. Because after all, somehow those people need to be weeded out of the eternity that we hope to be in. We don't want to spend eternity with evil people. But there is a pretty fine line, isn't there, between, pointing at the bad people out there and the bad people who might be in here. I do know this, that somewhere, some preacher in some church is preaching a sermon today where he or she, but chances are it's a he, is saying something like, we've got to start weeding out some of the bad people in our church. The message is that in some churches there are people who, because of what they have done in the past or are doing right now, or the way they think about something, or something that they believe in, those people are not acceptable and welcome to the holy people. So got to weed them out. In a couple of weeks, 29 folk from Christ Lutheran Church, we're going to be heading to England and Scotland for a tour. And the main focus of the tour is to study the English Reformation and to visit the places of the English Reformation. I got to tell you, even though I took religion history classes, I didn't know, or I don't know, that much about the English Reformation. So I had been doing quite a bit of reading. And what I knew was, King Henry VIII wanted to have a male heir, but he wasn't able to have one. And so he declared himself the head of the church in England, not the Pope, but he would be the head, just so that he could divorce his wife and marry another in hopes to having a male heir. But what I began to discover in reading about the English history was even more concerning. Because Henry declared himself the head of the English church, he then could decide who the church leaders were. And so he would handpick who his priests were going to be, and who the bishops were going to be, and the cardinals, and the archbishop. That was the big piece. And they could create this power block that if you disagreed with them, you were going to be in trouble. You could lose your life. But after Henry's death, and after the premature death of his son Edward, then things kind of got thrown up in the air. And there was a grab for political and religious power in England. So much so that whoever would be the king or the queen would then hold all the marbles. And a very important person comes along after Edward dies, and it's Henry's daughter, Mary. You might know her by another name, Bloody Mary. And she begins to have people burned at the stake, left and right, simply because they disagreed with her theology and her religion. Over 300 church leaders died at the stake because of Mary. And I'm sure if you were to ask Mary why she was doing this, she'd say something like, because there are bad people in the church. We can't have that. We need to weed them out one way or another. Well, I hope you can see the fallacy in this pursuit. I mean, whoever has the power are the ones who then can determine who the weeds are. But sometimes the weeds that get pulled aren't weeds at all, but wheat. And sometimes those who think they are wheat are really weeds. And so Jesus tells this parable maybe as a way to suggest that the better plan is just let the weeds be. Don't worry about them. Not our job to pull weeds. None of us can tell, simply upon looking at someone or listening to them, who the good ones are and who the bad ones are. So better leave this job to somebody who knows what they're doing. Later, not now, later. So why would Jesus tell us this parable? Well, I kind of think he does so because there is a deeper reality that he wishes for us to understand about bad people. Maybe this parable isn't so much about, bad people out there or bad people in here. Maybe it's about the badness that exists in each one of us. I think we are complex, confusing, intertwined masses of both good and bad. I think maybe one of the most genius things that Martin Luther ever said is that we are both saint and sinner at the same time. I think that at any given moment, probably at this very moment, you are thinking both good things and bad things. You might be thinking, well, that person over there, seated across the room, is such a wonderful, nice, kind person. And you might be thinking, I wonder if I could get away with murdering my husband, or my wife, or my pastor. Because that's how we're wired. There is stuff in each and every one of us we're not proud of. And for the record, this bad stuff in us, we in the church call sin. And it's selfishness, and it's pettiness, and it's unmercifully judging other people. It's saying nasty things to people, or it's thinking nasty things about people. It's not telling the truth, or just out and out lying. It's compromising the vows that you have made to a spouse, to a family, to a job, to a neighborhood, to a church. It's acting on the thought that what is most important is what brings you pleasure at the expense of others, which may lead then to spending money that you don't have, or watching things that you shouldn't, or being with people who aren't good for you. And understand that in this quick list, I'm just scratching the surface, the things that simply reflect badness that exists within us. And I could go on for quite a bit longer, but I'm not going to, because this conversation wears me out, and it makes me feel guilty too. So my point is, okay, you have weeds. But the bigger point that I wish to make and one that I hope that you hear, is that you also have wheat. And that's what I think Jesus is lifting up in this parable. It's not all weeds. It's not all bad or evil or sin. You have stuff in you that is life-affirming, that is beautiful, that brings joy to others, that is creative, that makes you amazingly gifted. You have stuff that brings out the best in other people, and you have stuff in you that brings joy and pleasure to the God who made you. To put a fine point on it, there is goodness in you. Maybe sometimes the church and us pastors talk about too much the good that is not in you. Maybe we need to talk more about the good that God has made you to be and the good that is within you. I gotta tell you, one of my greatest joys of being pastor of this church is how often I get to see goodness in action. I get to hear stories about how people are cared for from one another. I get to hear stories about how people who have gone through rough patches in life have received phone calls, meals, letters, emails to simply encourage. I get to watch ministry teams where people are engaging with others in ways that change lives. You know, not huge changes, incremental, but changes nonetheless. I got to watch this week where kids and adults poured themselves into the children of our community and of our church and Adventure Camp, and it was life-affirming. I get to hear stories about how people in this congregation serve on boards, write checks, offer assistance to nonprofit agencies and organizations in our town that do great things. I get to hear stories from others in our community about how many of you are involved in positive, incredibly good things. This past Friday, Bill McCall, our church administrator, and I attended a lunch on homelessness in Visalia and Tulare County. I had 2 people come up to me at one time or another during that lunch to say, hey, thank you for being a church that cares for the homelessness. Thank you for being a congregation that's involved with senior housing. I mean, it was such a cool thing. And these are things that I'm not doing. These are things that you're doing. And then how often do I get together with other pastors and hear another pastor talk about somebody in this community that has stepped up way beyond what is normal to do amazing things, and only to discover that that pastor is talking about one of you. I guess what I'm saying is I know that there are weeds in the world and weeds even among us, largely because I know that there are weeds in each of us. But I choose to look at the wheat and to look at the things that ultimately fall under God's grace, who sent Jesus to die for the sin of the whole world, and who I believe is the only one capable of dealing with weeds in such a way that the wheat will be preserved. So in the meantime, we give thanks for the wheat that is among us, the good that you do, and the good that is in you. And I await for the answer to the weeds that are in my grass. Amen. The peace of the Lord be with you always. I invite you to rise and share the peace of Christ with those who are near you.